Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me into your living room today to tell you a story. The title of this story is called So Many Jobs. I've had so many jobs in my life that it's hard to keep track of them in one sitting. But I think it was by design because I remember sitting in family gatherings, listening to all the old codgers, old geezers as I used to call them, tell stories about things that happened 40, 50 years ago. First of all, I couldn't believe that they were that old, that they could remember things so far away, so long ago. But of course, now today that I'm 65, I remember all that kind of stuff. But the stories they told me were really fun, and I remember wanting to be like them when I got older. I wanted to be able to tell a good story. So I think that all the jobs that I've had it's kind of my way of gaining the experience that I needed to do that, even though it was rather subconscious. So, all my stories all of my jobs have been story worthy. And even the first one, my first job was cutting lawns for my grandpa. And he made me do it twice. The first time I cut the lawn, I thought it was great. But then he says, nope, cut it again. I'm like, well, what do you mean cut it again? It looks fine. Cut it again, darn it. Okay, fine. So I cut it again. Point was, you got to do what the boss says. So I got that. No problem. Second job was working for a little French restaurant in my neighborhood. And this little 15-year-old brain couldn't handle the two things that I had to do, and that was make garlic bread and make salads. The salads was great. I could do that easily. But when I was making salad, I kept forgetting about the garlic bread. And so I burnt like 8 different loaves of garlic bread, and it was very embarrassing. But still, one of the owners was a woman about 5 feet tall, maybe 100 pounds, soaking wet. And she just got spitting mad at me. And she comes up to me and she goes, "You've got to remember, you've got to think, you've got to think." It's like, okay. I never forgot another loaf of bread after that point, and I really believe that I turned from a 15-year-old kid that day to a young thinking adult, understanding that I had to learn how to think to keep a job in life. So through all my jobs, I've learned a lot of things. You got to be on time for a job. I remember one of my employers got really mad because I showed up at 3:01 instead of 3 o'clock. And he says, "I pay you to be here at 3 o'clock. You be here at 3 o'clock." Okay, I got that. Another job I had was working for a janitor. And I didn't do a job very well, and I actually got fired. And so that's the lesson there. Do your job well or get fired. As a matter of fact, folks, one of my claims to fame, is that I was fired by the Grateful Dead. I was their janitor, and they didn't like the job that I did, and they basically got rid of me. But I've also learned sometimes you just have to take a job. You don't really have a choice in it. You take the job that's offered to you because you got to have the money, you got to survive. I've learned that there are mean bosses out there. There just are. It's a fact of life. You either got to deal with them or you have to leave. I chose to leave one of the mean bosses that I had. I chose to stay for another mean boss I had. Both choices were good choices. It all depends on the circumstance. I've learned that when you're working with all echelons of society, that everybody has value. That it's important to recognize that everyone deserves respect and everyone deserves a level of empathy if you can give it to them. I don't know. I've learned so much. I was in the military for a while. I learned how incredible that organization is with respect to logistics. The logistics that they have to be able to handle to do what they do is absolutely incredible, and I have so much respect for the military. I've learned that women are as good a firefighter as any man is. I was a firefighter for a summer from the National Forest Service, and I was working shoulder to shoulder with these women, and their butts were on the line too. They worked every bit as good as any man there. I have a lot of respect for women firefighters. So all of these things, they're all stories that I've had, and someday maybe I'll tell you those stories, or stories about those things. Who knows? But today I wanted to talk about the things that I experienced in hospitals. I worked in hospitals in 2 capacities, or 3 really, but I'll tell you about 2. One was a phlebotomist, and that is a blood drawer, and the other one was a registered dietitian. In both cases, you have to go into the hospital rooms to talk with the people. And you have real, I mean, in this case of a blood draw, you have very intimate contact with the people. And as a dietitian, you have a very personal contact with them as well. But my first job as a registered dietitian was at Atascadero State Hospital, and it was a hospital for the criminally insane. That hospital was a kind of a scary place to work in. I remember the very first day we were oriented on self-defense. Our teacher taught us all kinds of moves and how to defend ourselves and how to take a patient down if necessary. And then he also warned us. He said, now, I'm telling you, most of these guys, they're on their medications. They seem fine. They don't seem like they're crazy at all. But a lot of times they stop taking their medications, unbeknownst to anybody in the hospital, and they decompensate and they become insane again. And you can't trust them. You can't trust them at all, no matter how long you work with them. So, okay, I took his word for it. But as it turns out, about 6 months later, this guy was killed by one of the patients that he had known for 20 years. He took the patient to the workshop. He kind of trusted him. He was his assistant, fixing things around the hospital. Turned his back on him, and the guy hit him over the noggin with a hammer. That was the end of his life. That was really too bad. So just walking in the doors to that hospital was kind of scary. It was a little bit fearful. But one day the doctor asked me to put this great big monster, this 6'9" monster. He's 340 pounds. He had terrible fat in his blood, and the doctor wanted me to extend his life and put him on a diet. Well, this guy killed 6 people in one outing. It was a picnic outing. He was in a lower security place. They took him out on a picnic, 5 patients and 1 psych tech. He killed all of them in one afternoon. So here's this massive dude, right? And I got to put him on a diet. And he's standing up to me and he's looking like he goes, I don't want to be on no diet. And I said, well, I'm sorry, sir, but the doctor told me to put you on a diet. I don't want to be on no diet. I'm sorry, sir. I have to do what the doctor tells me. So I put him on a diet. I cut his portions back. It was the scariest thing in my life. Wherever I came from, a secure location in the hospital to the general locations of the general population area of the hospital, he was standing there. This dude was standing there, and he was staring right at me. He was far enough away to where I kept away from him, but if I got close to him, I know that dude was going to kill me. He was going to take me, and he was going to snap my neck, and that would be the end of his diet, I'm sure. But, I was freaked out. This happened. This kept going on for like 3 days. Finally, I said, I don't care what the doctor said. I'm taking this guy off his diet. And I took him off his diet, I never saw him again. A patient never saw him again. That's all he wanted. His intimidation worked. That's all he wanted, to be taken off that diet. Good. Eat till your heart's content, buddy. So that was an interesting place. Now, I also worked in acute care hospitals, and it was very, very interesting. And I had some sad experiences in those hospitals. I would often walk into a hospital room right after a medical doctor had been in there telling the patient that they were terminally ill. And it was very, very difficult. Our patients, they'd be crying. They'd be so upset. I'll never forget this one lady. She was probably 65 years old. She was very slim and trim. She had never smoked in her life. She didn't drink. She ate reasonably. She exercised. She got stomach cancer. And, she was nearing the end of her life, and she was very, very upset. And it was very upsetting. And I felt really awful for her. And I remember this other guy. He was a really nice older gentleman, and he was lying in bed, and I had to go in to get his food preferences as a dietitian. And when I walked in, he just greeted me with the warmest smile ever. Just, hi, how are you? It's so good to see you. I mean, that's how he made me feel every time I walked into his room. And I saw him almost every day for about 2 weeks. I just really enjoyed him. And we talked, and he was always super pleasant until I went in on the last day, and the bed was empty, and the sheets were gone. And I said, well, what happened to Mr. So-and-so? And they said, well, he died. I'm sorry. And it was just crushed me. I liked this guy so much. He was so genuine. He was so sweet. As it turns out, he was a pastor, preacher, or something like that. And he just never complained about anything, and he always made me feel so welcome. And I was just deeply, deeply sorrowful when he passed away. Now, on a lighter note, I also used to work in psych wards in different hospitals, acute care hospitals. And it's not like a Atascadero State Hospital, an acute care hospital. But the thing is about psych wards is that the patients there, they have no filters. They say and do whatever they want to do because they're basically going through a psychotic episode. So they really are out of control. And it's sad. It's sad. I know, but it's sad. But there's also some things that are quite funny. For instance, there was this guy he was strapped down to a chair. He had hurt himself earlier, breaking some windows. He cut his hands. He was all bandaged up, but he was also strapped to the chair so he couldn't hurt himself. And so he's going, "God, untie these straps! God, untie these straps!" And of course, God didn't untie the straps, So anyway, I had to walk in front of him, and so when I did, he was tied on me. He was like, "I love you, I love you." And so I mean, just like that with a really sweet voice, right? So I looked down at him and said, "Well, I love you too, buddy. I'm sorry you're stuck like that." And I walked into a room, and there was a two-person room, and I was taking blood on this one particular occasion, and from one of the women in the beds. And here comes the other lady that was supposed to be in the other bed. She comes in there and she takes her gown and she just drops it on the floor. So she's naked as anything and staring right at me. And I'm like I'm super nervous, hiding, trying to avert my eyes, and hurried up, got out of there, walked by her real fast. And it's like, oh my gosh, no filters, right? And so another time I was taking blood from a guy, and he was lying flat, and he had his arm like this, and I put my head over his fist, and I was taking his blood, and he reaches up like that, he tries to punch me in the nose. It's like, well, he missed me, he was too slow. But it's like, holy smoke, I mean, all these people with no filters, and it kind of made me think, when I'm out in the public, when everybody does have their filters on, thank goodness, how many of them want to punch me in the nose? How many of them want to tell me they love me, or how many of them want to take their clothes off for me? It's like, I'm so glad that there's filters out there in the regular world. So after that, I got a job working in education. So I went from nutrition to working in public policy, and I got a job with the California Department of Education. So I was working in first nutrition programs, school lunch, school breakfast, stuff like that. And then I got promoted, and I was working in curriculum development. I was working for special ed. I was working for after-school programs and student support programs. I worked for the schools for the deaf and the blind as well. Great experiences. And I think back on that, I'm thinking it's fitting that I ended up in education, because who were the first educators? Storytellers were the first educators, right? They're the ones that spread the word. They're the ones that passed down the history. Storytellers were the first teachers, the first educators, really. So anyway, now that I'm retired, I'm still looking forward to more adventures and more stories that I can sit down and tell you all some more exciting stories. So anyway, thank you for listening.